The atmosphere inside Clarence House has always been one of refined elegance and hushed efficiency, but on a recent, rain-slicked Tuesday evening, that practiced calm was shattered by a silence so heavy it felt suffocating. It began with the arrival of a nondescript black sedan, bypassing the main gates and sliding through a side entrance rarely used by anyone other than high-level security details or the most senior government officials. From the vehicle emerged three men, senior solicitors from the firm that has handled the most intimate legal affairs of the House of Windsor for decades. They carried with them a single, leather-bound briefing, sealed with the late Queen Elizabeth II's private signet. It was a document so sensitive that, according to palace whispers, even the King's most trusted private secretaries were denied access to the room. The meeting had been arranged under a cloak of absolute secrecy. Household staff were reportedly instructed to vacate the surrounding corridors, leaving the King in a vacuum of isolation as he prepared to hear the final, definitive interpretation of his mother's will. For months, there had been a quiet, bureaucratic tug-of-war behind the scenes, a legal housekeeping exercise, as aides called it, to settle the complexities of the late Queen's vast private estates. But as the doors to the King's study clicked shut, the air in the palace changed. Those standing guard outside noted the unusual length of the silence that followed. There were no raised voices, no sounds of royal indignation, only a profound, hollow stillness that seemed to radiate from behind the heavy oak doors. When King Charles III finally emerged from that closed-door session nearly 2 hours later, the transformation was, by all accounts, catastrophic. Palace insiders, accustomed to the King's usually animated and scholarly demeanor, were reportedly horrified by what they saw. The monarch appeared physically diminished, his skin an ashen pallor that contrasted sharply with the royal blue of his suit. His hands, usually busy with documents or gestures of engagement, were said to be visibly trembling. One source described the King as pale and shaken to the very core, looking less like a sovereign and more like a man who had just witnessed the collapse of a lifelong dream. The cause of this emotional devastation was not a matter of state, nor a crisis of parliament, but something far more personal and, in many ways, more permanent. The solicitors had come to deliver the final verdict on the status of Sandringham, the Norfolk estate that has served as the private sanctuary of the monarchy for generations. What King Charles allegedly learned that evening was that his mother, the late Queen Elizabeth II, had not merely left a will, she had left a fortress. Deep within the complex legal architecture of her final arrangements lay a series of ironclad restrictions that specifically targeted the future occupancy and authority of the estate. The explosive core of the briefing was the revelation that Queen Elizabeth II had allegedly taken extraordinary steps to ensure that Queen Camilla would never hold independent authority or permanent residence at Sandringham following Charles's lifetime. While it had been long assumed that as Queen Consort, and eventually as a Queen Dowager, Camilla would naturally retain her place at the heart of the royal family's private life, the late Queen's will reportedly told a very different story. It was a strategy of inheritance containment, a legal maneuver designed to bypass the current reign's personal desires in favor of a rigid, bloodline-only continuity. For Charles, the news was a shattering betrayal of the domestic stability he had fought for over 5 decades. He had spent his life navigating public scandal, institutional resistance, and personal heartbreak to place Camilla by his side as his queen. He viewed Sandringham as the ultimate symbol of their shared victory, a place where they could finally rule and reside in peace, away from the prying eyes of the world. To discover that his own mother had quietly spent her final years erecting legal barriers to prevent this felt, to him, like a judgment delivered from beyond the grave. The shockwaves from this meeting rippled through the palace administration almost instantly. Senior aides moved with a sense of frantic urgency to suppress the details, but the King's visible distress made a total blackout impossible. Communications teams were reportedly put on high alert, instructed to kill any inquiries regarding estate management or succession protocols with clinical efficiency. Yet, the tension was palpable. The solicitor's visit had transformed a routine legal update into a full-scale constitutional family crisis. The question that now haunts the drawing rooms of the royal household is no longer if there is a conflict, but why? Why did Elizabeth II, a woman known for her deep sense of family duty, choose to create such a definitive line of exclusion? As the King retreated into a period of brooding silence following the briefing, the realization began to settle over his inner circle. The late Queen may have been gone for over a year, but she was still the one holding the scepter. The twilight briefing at Clarence House was not just a legal formality. It was the activation of a master plan, a silent decree that reminded the world and the King that in the House of Windsor, the institution always comes before the heart. This was the beginning of a cold, new reality for the king and queen consort. As the solicitors drove away into the London mist, they left behind a monarch who had realized that his reign was not as sovereign as he had believed, and a family that was about to find out that the most powerful force in the monarchy isn't the person sitting on the throne, but the ghost of the woman who sat there before him. The battle for Sandringham had begun, and the first casualty was the king's peace of mind. To the outside world, Sandringham is a sprawling 20,000-acre estate in the windswept reaches of Norfolk, a grand house of red brick and limestone, surrounded by ancient forests and manicured gardens. But inside the emotional architecture of the British monarchy, Sandringham is something far more profound. It is not merely a residence, it is a sanctuary, a private heartbeat, and the sacred geography where the House of Windsor truly breathes. For generations, while Buckingham Palace served as the office and Windsor Castle as the fortress, Sandringham was the home where the mask of majesty could finally be laid aside. It is this deep, almost spiritual significance that makes the reported revelations of Queen Elizabeth II so devastating for the current king and his queen consort. To understand why King Charles III was left shattered by the legal restrictions placed upon his wife, one must first understand the history of the soil itself. Unlike the Crown estate properties, which belong to the monarch only for the duration of their reign, Sandringham is a private possession. It was purchased in 1862 by Queen Victoria for her son, the future Edward VII, intended as a rural retreat where the Prince of Wales could escape the stifling protocols of London. Under his care, and later under the devoted stewardship of King George V, it was transformed into what courtiers called the most comfortable house in England. George V famously wrote, "Dear old Sandringham, the place I love better than anywhere else in the world." For Queen Elizabeth II, this love was woven into her very DNA. Sandringham was the place where she spent her childhood winters, where she bonded with her father, George VI, over the shared silence of the Norfolk marshes, and most poignantly, it was the place where her father drew his last breath in 1952. Throughout her 70-year reign, her commitment to the estate was unyielding. Every year, she stayed there until after the anniversary of her father's death in February, a quiet vigil that reinforced the estate's role as the anchor of the bloodline. In her eyes, Sandringham was not a gift to be handed out or shared through marital alliances, it was a trust to be preserved for the direct line of succession. This is the bloodline legacy that insiders now claim was the driving force behind the Queen's final legal maneuvers. Reports suggest that Elizabeth II viewed Sandringham as a protected vessel for the future of the monarchy, specifically for Prince William and his children. She reportedly believed that the continuity of the crown depended on certain sacred assets remaining entirely within the direct line of heirs. If the estate were to fall under the independent control of a queen consort, or if a widow's rights were to create a competing faction within the household after the king's passing, the stability she had spent 7 decades building could be compromised. For Queen Camilla, the realization of these restrictions is said to be a staggering blow to her sense of belonging. For decades, her journey from the other woman to queen consort was defined by a slow, agonizing struggle for legitimacy. She endured public vitriol, media hounding, and the initial coldness of the royal family itself. When she finally married Charles in 2005, and later when she was crowned at his side, many believed the battle for her status was over. She had reportedly come to see Sandringham as the ultimate prize of that struggle, a place where she would finally be the undisputed matriarch, holding court during the family's most intimate gatherings. Insiders suggest that Camilla had long envisioned her future at Sandringham as one of permanence. She saw herself as the successor to the Queen Mother's role, a beloved figure who would continue to influence the estate's operations and social fabric long after Charles's reign had concluded. To be barred or restricted by the late Queen's will is not just a logistical inconvenience, it is a symbolic exile. It suggests that even after all these years, even with the title of Queen, she is still viewed by the ghost of the institution as an outsider, a temporary occupant rather than a permanent part of the foundation. The tension is further exacerbated by the way the estate functions as a symbol of authority. At Sandringham, the person who controls the guest list and the management of the land is the person who truly holds the power over the family's private life. By reportedly linking the estate's future authority directly to the heirs, Prince William and Princess Anne, the late Queen effectively bypassed Camilla's influence before it could even take root. This move was not an accident of legal drafting. According to royal commentators, it was a strategic strike designed to ensure that the Windsor heartbeat would never be redirected by anyone outside the direct bloodline. As King Charles walked the grounds of Sandringham following that fateful briefing, the weight of the past must have felt heavier than ever. He is a man who prizes harmony and has spent his life trying to bridge the gap between his mother's rigid sense of duty and his own emotional needs. He wanted Sandringham to be a monument to his love for Camilla, a place where their union was solidified in the very soil of the monarchy. Instead, he has found that the soil is guarded by a legal and spiritual fortress he cannot breach. The silence that now hangs over Sandringham is no longer the peaceful quiet of the Norfolk countryside. It is a silence charged with the unspoken verdict of a mother who, even in death, refused to let sentiment override the survival of the crown. The estate stands as a red brick reminder that in the world of the Windsors, the soul of the monarchy does not belong to those who wear the crown, but to the lineage that ensures the crown never falls. For Camilla, the invisible wall around Sandringham has become the ultimate proof that some gates, no matter how hard you knock, are never truly opened. The legal language of a sovereign is never accidental. Every comma, every clause, and every carefully chosen precedent is a brick in the wall of institutional survival. As the solicitors at Clarence House continued their line-by-line interpretation of Queen Elizabeth II's final will, it reportedly became chillingly clear that the late monarch had not merely been organizing her private affairs, she had been conducting a masterclass in inheritance containment. What was once dismissed as routine estate planning was now revealed to be a sophisticated web of legal tripwires, designed with a precision that only 7 decades on the throne could produce. According to whispers circulating within the highest echelons of royal legal circles, the centerpiece of the crisis is a series of succession preservation clauses buried deep within the late Queen's private arrangements. These clauses reportedly create an invisible wall around Sandringham, separating the right of occupancy from the right of authority. While King Charles III holds the title of monarch, the long-term operational control and the residual influence over the estate were allegedly tied directly to the direct line of descent, specifically targeting the future reign of Prince William. For King Charles, the realization that these protections were established years, perhaps even decades, before his mother's passing was a profound psychological blow. It suggested that even during the years when the family appeared to be reconciling with his marriage to Camilla, the Queen was quietly working with the Duchy of Lancaster and her private solicitors to ensure that the Windsor heartbeat remained insulated from any future marital complications. The late Queen, a student of history who had witnessed the abdication crisis of 1936 and the fractured loyalties of the 1990s, understood that the most dangerous threats to a monarchy often come from within the family's own emotional desires. One of the most devastating tripwires reportedly identified by the solicitors involves the operational independent authority of the Queen consort. In previous generations, the widow of a king, the Queen Dowager, often maintained significant influence over royal estates, sometimes acting as a matriarchal power center that could rival the reigning sovereign's household. This was famously the case with the Queen Mother, who held sway over royal life for 50 years after her husband's death. But Elizabeth II reportedly designed her will to prevent exactly this kind of factionalism. By stripping the consort of any permanent, independent claim to Sandringham's future operations, she ensured that there would be only one center of power after Charles, Prince William. This was not a move born of personal malice, but of institutional pragmatism. Sources suggest the late Queen feared a scenario where competing loyalties could arise. If Queen Camilla were to establish a permanent power base at Sandringham, it could create a divided household once William ascended the throne. The legal tripwires were designed to make Camilla a guest of the crown rather than a mistress of the estate. To a woman who has spent her life trying to secure her footing on the shifting sands of royal acceptance, being designated as a temporary custodian is a humiliation that cuts deeper than any public headline. The precision of the wording reportedly stunned the king's own legal team. Phrases such as inalienable bloodline trust and preservation of sovereign continuity were used to lock the estate's management into a rigid framework that even a reigning king would find nearly impossible to overturn. This is the strategic strike that has left Charles reeling. He had hoped to use his reign to rewrite the narrative of his and Camilla's life, to grant her the permanence and security she had been denied for so long. Instead, he has found that his mother had already written the ending to that story long before she drew her last breath. Furthermore, palace insiders whisper that these arrangements were not made in a vacuum. There are rumors that the late Queen held discreet consultations with certain trusted members of the Old Guard, likely including Princess Anne, to ensure that the institutional memory of these arrangements would be preserved. This would explain why Anne and William reportedly appeared so composed during the briefings that left the king shattered. They weren't just hearing a will, they were witnessing the activation of a strategy they had perhaps been prepared for all along. The logic behind the Elizabethan strategy is as cold as the Norfolk winter. By protecting Sandringham from outside influence, a category that, in the rigid world of royal succession, includes even a queen consort, the late queen was protecting the monarchy from the Wallace-Simpson effect. She understood that personal affection can cloud judgment, and that a king's devotion to his wife might lead him to make concessions that could weaken the crown's long-term stability. The will was her final veto, a silent command that the sanctity of the bloodline must never be bartered for personal happiness. As the full weight of these legal barriers sank in, the atmosphere at Clarence House turned from shock to a grim, brooding silence. The solicitors had essentially informed the king that while he wears the crown, he does not truly own the future. The late Queen Elizabeth II had spent her life as the ultimate protector of the faith, but in her final years, she became something more, the protector of the future. She had built a fortress of ink and parchment that no amount of royal indignation could dismantle. For King Charles, the tragedy is that he is now forced to be the executor of his own wife's exclusion. Every time he walks the halls of Sandringham, he will be reminded that the woman beside him is there on a lease granted by a mother who didn't fully trust the permanence of their position. The legal tripwires are now active, and they have transformed the royal family's favorite sanctuary into a gilded cage of institutional rules. The Queen is dead, but her strategy lives on, unyielding, invisible, and utterly devastating. The tragedy of King Charles III has always been one of timing and the crushing weight of expectation. He is a man who waited 7 decades to lead, only to find that the throne is less a seat of absolute power and more a gilded cage of predetermined legacies. But the news delivered by the solicitors at Clarence House wasn't just another institutional hurdle, it was a personal arrow shot from the past, aimed directly at the heart of the one thing Charles prizes most, his relationship with Queen Camilla. To those watching from the inner circles, the crisis has become a Pyrrhic victory. Charles has the crown, but he has lost the ability to protect his wife's place within the monarchy's most sacred sanctuary. For Charles, the emotional toll is said to be immense and suffocating. This is the man who famously told the world that Camilla was non-negotiable. He spent the better part of 50 years fighting his family, the press, and the British public to ensure that she would not just be accepted, but honored. He had envisioned his reign as a period of vindication, a time when the other woman narrative would be buried forever beneath the dignity of her role as queen. Sandringham was to be the cornerstone of that vindication, a private world where they were the masters of their own destiny. To discover that his mother, whom he revered with a complex mix of devotion and fear, had spent her final years ensuring Camilla would remain an outsider in the estate's long-term future, is a blow from which many believe the king may never fully recover. The atmosphere behind palace walls has reportedly shifted from professional concern to a cold, domestic war. Insiders describe a king who has become increasingly withdrawn, prone to long periods of brooding silence. He is caught in a psychological pincer movement. To challenge the will is to dishonor the mother who was the embodiment of the monarchy he now leads. To accept it is to admit to his wife that he cannot give her the permanence she deserves. It is a classic Windsor dilemma, where personal love is pitted against institutional duty, and as history has shown, duty almost always wins. Queen Camilla's reaction, meanwhile, is described not as explosive anger, but as a hollow, devastating realization. Sources close to her inner circle suggest she is deeply stung by the symbolic exclusion. For Camilla, Sandringham wasn't about the acreage or the hunting parties, it was about legitimacy. To be barred by the late Queen's legal framework is a reminder that in the eyes of the eternal crown, she is a passing chapter, not part of the foundational text. She had reportedly hoped to spend her twilight years as the matriarch of the Norfolk estate, a role that would have solidified her status as a permanent fixture in the royal story. Instead, she has been reminded that her lease on the heart of the monarchy is temporary, expiring the moment Charles's reign ends. This emotional fracture has allegedly begun to manifest in the daily operations of the royal household. Courtiers have noted a growing distance between the king and queen consort. They are reportedly seeking separate consultations with advisors, Charles with his constitutional experts, and Camilla with her own circle of trusted confidants. Conversations that used to be fluid and collaborative now reportedly end abruptly whenever the subject of estate management or future residency arises. One palace source whispered that the warmth that famously defined their relationship is being cooled by the shadow of Elizabeth. The tragedy is compounded by the king's current health struggles. Battling illness while simultaneously navigating a family crisis of this magnitude has left Charles emotionally exhausted. He is a monarch who desires harmony, yet he finds himself presiding over a household divided by a ghost. He looks at Camilla and sees the woman who sacrificed her reputation for him. He looks at the legal briefings and sees the mother who sacrificed her son's personal happiness for the stability of the crown. It is a heavy burden for a man in the winter of his life, realizing that even as king, he cannot override the final veto of the woman who came before him. For Camilla's supporters, the situation is one of quiet humiliation. They argue that she has done everything asked of her. She has been loyal, hardworking, and a pillar of support for the king during his most difficult moments. To have this legal trap spring shut now feels like a betrayal of the progress they thought had been made. There is a sense that the old guard of the palace, those who never truly warmed to Camilla, are now using the late queen's will as a shield to re-establish the proper order of succession, one that prioritizes bloodline over marital devotion. As the king and queen move through their public engagements with practiced smiles and steady gazes, the private reality is one of profound heartbreak. The crown has once again demanded a sacrifice. It has reminded Charles that he is not a private man with a private life, but a vessel for a 1,000-year-old institution. And for Camilla, the invisible wall around Sandringham serves as a cold, red brick reminder that she may be the king's wife, but she will never truly be the queen's daughter. The heart of the king is hers, but the soul of the monarchy remains locked away in a safe to which she has no key. While King Charles III reportedly reeled from the shattering revelations of his mother's will, a very different atmosphere was said to be taking hold in other corners of the royal household. If the king's reaction was one of emotional devastation, the reactions of Prince William and Princess Anne were described by palace insiders as something far more unsettling, a profound, calculated composure. The fact that both the Prince of Wales and the Princess Royal were reportedly briefed on the legal restrictions surrounding Sandringham long before the king had fully processed them has triggered a fresh wave of speculation. It suggests that while Charles was navigating the present, the silent sentinels of the monarchy were already focused on the future. Princess Anne, often described as the coolest head in the House of Windsor, has emerged in these reports as the primary guardian of her mother's institutional vision. To those who know the inner workings of the palace, Anne is the living embodiment of Queen Elizabeth II's uncompromising philosophy of duty first, self second. Insiders whisper that Anne may have been privy to the late Queen's inheritance containment strategy for years. She was not a victim of the news, she was its witness. For Anne, the restrictions placed upon Queen Camilla are not a matter of personal spite, but of structural necessity. She reportedly views the protection of Sandringham as a sacred trust, one that must be kept within the direct bloodline to prevent the kind of factionalism that has historically weakened the crown. The role of Prince William in this unfolding crisis is perhaps the most significant. As the primary heir and the future sovereign, William is the ultimate beneficiary of the late Queen's foresight. According to palace administrative streams, the legal framework at Sandringham doesn't just restrict Camilla, it actively empowers William. By ensuring that the estate's long-term operational authority is tied to the direct line of succession, Elizabeth II effectively cleared the path for the William era long before it was scheduled to begin. Insiders claim that William has maintained a deliberate and disciplined silence regarding the conflict. He has not engaged in the domestic skirmishes at Clarence House, nor has he offered public reassurances to his father's camp. Instead, he is said to be focused on future-proofing his own reign. To William, Sandringham is not just a holiday home, it is the place where he will eventually raise his children as the primary occupants of the throne's private heart. The late Queen's will ensures that when that day comes, he will not have to negotiate for control with a Queen Dowager or a separate faction of the family. The invisible wall around Sandringham is, for William, a protective shield. This quiet coordination between Anne and William has reportedly sent a chilling message through royal circles, particularly to those in Queen Camilla's inner circle. It has become increasingly clear that the future reign is already being organized, with or without the harmony of the present one. Staff members and senior courtiers, who are historically sensitive to the shifting winds of royal power, have reportedly begun to pivot. There is a subtle but undeniable movement of loyalty toward the William camp. Decisions regarding the long-term management of royal lands, staff appointments, and even future guest lists at Sandringham are increasingly being made with an eye toward how they will fit into the next generation's vision. For Queen Camilla, this shift is said to be isolating in the extreme. She finds herself in a position where the very people she calls family are the ones standing as the silent enforcers of her exclusion. Every time she looks at William Orrin, she is reminded of the institutional machinery that views her as a temporary passenger on the royal ship. Sources suggest that Camilla's allies have tried to open private channels for negotiation, hoping to soften the language of the estate's future occupancy, but they have been met with a wall of protocol from and at polite but firm distance from William. The dynamic has transformed the royal family into two distinct camps: the current reign, struggling with the emotional fallout of the past, and the succession guardians, focused on the cold stability of the future. This is the new order that Elizabeth II reportedly intended to spark. She knew that Charles's reign would be a period of transition, and she arguably used her will to ensure that the transition didn't lead to a dilution of royal authority. By placing the keys to the kingdom's private heart in the hands of the silent sentinels, she ensured that the monarchy would remain a fortress of tradition, even if it meant breaking the heart of the sitting king. As the king struggles with his health and the weight of his mother's legacy, the influence of William and Anne continues to grow. They are seen as the old guard and the new guard in perfect alignment. They represent the endurance of the bloodline over the transience of marriage. And in the hushed corridors of the palace, the message is becoming louder every day: the era of the Windsors is moving forward, and its most sacred grounds are being held under a lock and key that only the right hands can turn. For Camilla, the realization is bitter: she is a queen in the present, but in the future of Sandringham, she is already a ghost. As the London mist swallowed the Solicitors' sedan and the heavy doors of Clarence House were finally bolted for the night, a new and unsettling reality began to settle over the British monarchy. The briefing was over, the ink on the late Queen's will was dry, and the invisible wall around Sandringham had been officially confirmed. For King Charles III, the crisis was no longer a matter of legal interpretation; it was a profound lesson in the nature of the crown he had waited his entire life to wear. He had discovered that even as king, he was still a son living under the meticulous, unyielding shadow of a mother whose commitment to the institution did not end with her final breath. The Elizabethan strategy revealed through these estate restrictions is perhaps the final and most powerful act of Queen Elizabeth II's 70-year reign. For decades, the world saw her as a grandmotherly figure, a symbol of stability and quiet grace. But those inside the palace administrative circles now recognize her as the ultimate strategist of royal survival. She understood a brutal truth that has escaped many of her predecessors: monarchies do not collapse in moments of public outrage alone, they weaken slowly through emotional compromises, private favoritism, and the blurring of lines between personal desire and institutional responsibility. By reportedly locking Sandringham away from the independent influence of a queen consort, Elizabeth II was not merely managing property, she was conducting a surgical strike against future instability. She understood that the transition from her long, anchored reign to the unknown waters of the future would be the most fragile moment for the House of Windsor. Her will was the anchor she dropped from the past to ensure the ship did not drift. It was a message to Charles, to Camilla, and to the world: the crown is a sacred trust passed between generations of the bloodline, and it cannot be bartered for personal happiness or marital vindication. For King Charles, the realization of this final veto has been described as a heartbreaking awakening. He is a monarch who has always worn his heart on his sleeve, a man who believed that the strength of his devotion to Camilla could eventually reshape the very foundations of the monarchy. But the ghost of Sandringham has reminded him that the institution is designed to be heartless. It demands that the individual be consumed by the role. Charles now finds himself in the tragic position of being the guardian of a system that systematically excludes the woman he fought so hard to protect. He is the executor of his own wife's symbolic exile. This development has accelerated an irreversible balance of power within the palace. The focus has shifted, almost overnight, from the reign of Charles to the stability of the succession. With Prince William and Princess Anne standing as the silent enforcers of this legacy, the monarchy has entered a phase of succession reinforcement. The structures are being tightened, the boundaries are being drawn, and the future is being insulated from the emotional fractures of the present. For Queen Camilla, the path forward is one of quiet, dignified acceptance of a role that is increasingly defined by its limitations. She remains the Queen at Charles's side, but she is no longer the mistress of the monarchy's future. In the drawing rooms of London and the hunting lodges of Norfolk, the whispers have turned toward the William era. The late Queen's will has effectively positioned William not just as the heir, but as the true sovereign of the sanctuary. The estate of Sandringham, with all its emotional and symbolic weight, is already being mentally and legally prepared for his arrival. This consolidation ensures that when the crown eventually passes again, the transition will be seamless, unburdened by the competing claims of a Queen Dowager or the remnants of a previous reign's domestic arrangements. The lesson Elizabeth II left behind is one of cold, magnificent endurance. She showed that a true sovereign cares more for the century ahead than the decade they are in. Her final strategy was to ensure that the Windsor heartbeat would continue to beat in the chests of those born to the role, protected from the outside influences that have historically brought empires to their knees. It is a harsh, unforgiving philosophy, but it is the reason the British monarchy remains standing while so many others have fallen to the pages of history. As silence once again descends over the cold winter fields of Sandringham, the red brick house stands as a monument to this unyielding rule. The gates remain locked, the forests remain quiet, and the legacy of Elizabeth II remains untouched. King Charles III may sit on the throne, but the ghost of his mother still holds the keys to the kingdom's heart. In the end, the battle for Sandringham revealed the oldest truth of all: the crown always wins, duty always triumphs over desire, and the Queen, even in death, remains the ultimate protector of the future. The story of the Windsor will is not just a tale of inheritance, it is the story of a mother who loved the monarchy more than she loved the personal peace of her son. And as the royal family moves forward into this new, colder era, they do so with the knowledge that the greatest force in their lives is not the man wearing the crown today, but the silent, strategic legacy of the woman who wore it yesterday. The strategy is active, the wall is built, and the future of the House of Windsor is, for now, perfectly, ruthlessly secure.